Hi, this is Eternal King bringing you another LOR video today. So far with my tutorial series, I spent a great deal of time kind of talking about the best aggro decks. I've talked about Metazig's Poppy and run some games with them. I've run some games with Azir Aurelia. I've run some games with Burn. I've run off camera. I've been playing some Draven Rumble. Um, the only thing I haven't really been playing is Fearsomes, but Fearsomes is also highly playable. So aggro doing very, very well in Eternal. Arguably one of the best style of decks for the format. But, you know, if I was to choose the next style of deck, in terms of the second most powerful and, you know, more or less on even footing, it would be Control. Control is a style of deck that does not exist in Standard, but is very, very healthy and doing very well in Eternal, and therefore I'd like to show the lists off the lists off to you. We're only 3 days away from the new season, so I don't have time to record and run another 4 videos with every control deck. Unless you guys are interested in me doing that, maybe once ladder is live, I could run some games of control on ladder, and if that's going to help you guys learn how to play a different style of deck, then I'm happy to do that. So feel free to mention in the comments if you want to see me on the 28th, if you want me to run some control games out with my preferred control list. But just talking about what I think is solid and very well positioned, it is Meta Jace Lux. Meta Jace Lux is my current favorite control deck in Eternal. Just in terms of the way that it plays, it's highly synergistic, it's highly champ focused, and it's just really nice mid-rangey control. Combo-y, synergy, swingy. It just does everything really well. So talking about its different components and why it's a good deck. Forge Chief, best PNZ 1-drop, other than the elusive 1-mana card that reduces the cost of spells. This is effectively doing the same thing, but in a 2-1 stat line. So Forge Chief, one of the best PNZ 1-drops. I'll go through the creatures first. Pharaoh's Financier. This is just as good as Bandle City Mayor. This is the control equivalent of Bandle City Mayor. I believe it was printed around the same time as well. And Bandle City Mayor being an excellent aggro card, Pharaoh's Financier essentially being the same thing but for control. It will basically give you a free 6-mana card from your regions that is more often than not game winning, assuming you know how to pick the right things out of the shuffle. Out of the cards presented, it's insane value. It's very, very good. It's just as good as Bandle City Mayor. I can't say one is better than the other, but just being on that power scale is fantastic for Eternal. Mageseeker Persuader, again, it is, a 4-3 challenger when it needs to be. You have 2 copies in the deck. And, that allows it to trade efficiently with most things, and that's really all it has to do. Petricite Broadwing essentially being a more reliable version of Mageseeker Persuader that, is better in the early game, with Mageseeker Persuader being a little bit better in the late game. And then you have Jace and you have Lux, and those are all everything else, and you have the 1 copy of Boat. So we have, Jace Boat here, which allows you to burn out the opponent, but also just tutors for Jace. Everything else is spells. So going through the spells, Epic Scrap Traption. If you spend 6 mana, you get a 6/6. But if Jace is leveled, you get 12/12 versus worth of stats. If you spend 8 mana, you're getting 16/16 worth of stats on 2 8/8 bodies. If you need to go tall, because say your opponent's presenting overwhelmed bodies, or you just need to go tall because your opponent's going tall, this deck has some capacity to go tall thanks to Epic Scrap Traption. Mystic Shot is a 3 of. Really no-brainer. Again, it can present lethal, or it can remove things. Best PNZ staple card. Sharp Sight over the other combat trick, because in this case, we're a control deck and we're worried about elusives. So if the opponent is playing elusive spam, we have the 3 of Sharp Sight that is also going to help protect our key units and provide those trades. So it is better in the... typically you want the 2/2 if you're the mid-range aggressive deck. Typically you want the 1/2 with the elusive blocker if you're the control deck. That's how that works. Single combat as a 1 of. When your opponent kind of goes all in to remove the Jace, you just single combat the Jace into whatever the thing is that the opponent's playing. Aftershock as a 2 of. do try to use this for landmark removal in the matchups where you need the landmark removal, because that's pretty devastating for the opponent. And it's the only card that in the deck that can remove landmarks effectively. Assembly line is a 3 of, so wait for the Jace to flip, and then play assembly line, and now you have a full board of 3 3s, right? Assuming Jace is down, then you're now, 5 wide thanks to assembly line, and assuming you play something cheap like a Forge Chief, now you're 6 wide in a control deck, which is very, very good. Back to back, again, is a burst trick. Typically used as like the 1 burst level for Lux, or, burst level and protect Lux kind of thing. That's like the old school Lux Jace tech is back to back. Formula is your draw. Hex Obliterator again, is kind of your vengeance. It's the one of vengeance in the deck. And then I've already talked about why Shock Blast is like the best control card in LOR, as just like on paper. In terms of a control card that is in that higher mana bracket, if you had to like decide between Vengeance and Shock Blast, like Shock Blast is better than Vengeance, just across the board. It's a very good card. So again, that's Meta Jace Lux. It should be in the top 5, I think, in my opinion, in terms of decks on like Mastering Runeterra. It is just objectively better than Field of Ramp, in my opinion. I think it's a more consistent control list. Nora Swain, again, not going to spend a huge amount of time on this one, but it's the ping spam, board spam deck. Everything trades in, and then everything gets cashed out with Ravenous Phlox, Disintegrates, Scorched Earths, again, as a 2-of for landmark removal. And then you just cycle, and eventually win off of Swain and Boat. But even then, you're not that concerned. You're just more concerned about draining the opponent's resources, because eventually you'll come out on top of cards because everything cycles. But that's a very straightforward control deck, very good. If I was to say which deck is easier to pilot, it's hard to say. There is some skill with Nora, but then in this particular deck where everything is so cycle oriented, I would say that this is probably the easiest control deck to run in LOR right now. So probably, Jace Lux is my personal favorite because it's the highest synergy control list. Meta Nora Swain is probably what I would recommend for new control players, because just jam the Nora and then just keep cycling until you win. Meta Jace Lux actually has to go for stuff sometimes, but it is my preferred control deck. Third control deck is Temple. So you might not think of Temple as very control focused, but it is basically that. If you look at the number of removal spells in this deck, you have, Aftershock, Get Excited, Divine, Whirlwind, Twisted Fate, and then the 3 of them Mystic Shots, and then you have all your cyclers, which are designed to block. So this deck is very block oriented, except with something like Windborne Mariner, which is swinging for value. But I don't know. I don't think anything that this deck does matters. It's literally just TF plus Temple, and then Ruined Rex, obviously being a very good control card as well. Or, good for burn wins, that sort of thing. But again, this is a very good control deck. Again, on the easier side of the spectrum. I would say this is about as easy to play as Nora Swain. Because at the end of the day, everything is so cycle focused that it's very hard to lose value when you have something like Sunken Temple, because like Sunken Temple encourages you to just blow through your hand any way you can, and so it's hard to lose out on value. So again, this is a very good control deck if you're interested. So we're up to 3 lists now of valid control decks that I think are very, very strong. And, the last one is obviously going to be Meta Thresh Nasus. Meta Thresh Nasus, not very high on the actual control cards. It's basically board control all up and through. So you just board spam, and get the big Nasus going. But that is, in LOR, and the way that LOR is situated, this style of standard control play, which basically means controlling through board, controlling through blocks, and that kind of Hearthstone way of control, where everything swings into each other. This is the deck that is best at doing that. So if you don't like, spell-based control, where you play spells and then kill your opponent's units, if you're more of a board-based controller, this deck is going to do great for you. You're playing into Ziggs Poppy, play Fading Icon 3 times. You've won the game. You don't have to do anything else. You just play Fading Icon 3 times into Ziggs Poppy, and you've already won. The 3-1 is going to block efficiently into any attacker, and then the 0-1 is going to block any sort of potential face damage the opponent can throw at you on top of the Vile Feasts and Hate Spikes. 3 of Blighted Caretaker will allow you to drag their entire board with your attack tokens. So like, it's literally board control. Just like everything on the board has good stat lines, aggressive stat lines. It goes wide well, and then trade into the opponent's stuff, and your stuff gets, your board gets bigger and their board gets smaller, and then that's all you have to do. So it's board control. So again, a very effective way, and then obviously Nasus's effect, giving everything a -1/-1, is a very strong control effect. So those are all very valid, control combo-y types of shells. That's a solid, list of at least 5 decks in the control space, and there are at least 5 decks in the aggro space. So that's just, kind of the main reason why I consider Eternal to be an exceptionally balanced format, is that like, you look at the high end of the spectrum, and there are decks available for you. You look at the low end of the spectrum, there are decks available for you. I think the only, type of deck that doesn't do as well in Eternal is probably mid-range. Kind of mid-range tempo. So in Standard, everything is like Eddy, right? Obviously, one of the best decks in Standard is still 3-way split Eddy, Morgana. And like, that's just like a tempo-y value mid-range deck. But then this isn't even going to show up on the stats list for Eternal. Like, it's not doing anything. Especially at post nerfs, it's even worse. It's not doing anything that is good enough for Eternal. Magical fettering on the Petricite Hound isn't good enough. Having a very strike heavy deck isn't good enough for Eternal, unless you're doing like a Fiora sort of thing, and then you have the win con there. But just jamming Petricite Charger with Shields of Durand isn't good enough for Eternal in most cases. So you talk about kind of that normal mid-rangey kind of shell, it's not great. I even believe that like Vlad Katarina, which is, a little more mid-rangey, isn't as good as, sort of a Ziggs Poppy and that sort of thing. It's not bad. It's not terrible, but it's just not quite as good. So this is Eternal King signing out. We're going to be seeing Ladder go live in about 3 days for Eternal. So there's going to be some new stuff, which I predict is going to be very much Action Samara. But then you're going to have your normal 4 decks, your 4-5 aggro decks and your 4-5 control decks that are going to do very well in Eternal as well. All right, this is Eternal King signing out.